All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to FWMD Live. Today, we are going to be talking about Native American Heritage Month, which is the entire month of November. And we also are going to be talking about understanding healthcare for Native Americans. I'm your host, Prescott Stokes III, the Integrated Content and Marketing Manager here at the TCU and UNTHSC School of Medicine. And today I am happy to be here with Dr. Lori Atkins.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Atkins. I just want to let everyone watching know that Dr. Atkins is an assistant professor here at the School of Medicine, and she is also a OBGYN with Phenom Women's Care at Baylor Scott & White in Fort Worth. I am also happy to have with us a very special guest, Professor Scott Langston.
Good afternoon. Thanks for letting me be here.
All right. Well, you know we're not letting you, Professor Langston. We are happy that you joined us. All right.
I'm happy to be here.
Great. I just want to let everyone know Professor Langston teaches as a full-time faculty member in the religion department at Texas Christian University, and he also serves as TCU's Native American Nations and Communities Liaison. As a non-native ally and Native American peoples, Professor Langston spends much of his time teaching and learning from and working with a variety of Native American communities right here in Fort Worth. Now, our two experts will be answering any questions you have about Native American Heritage Month and also healthcare for Native Americans. All you need to do to be a part of this conversation is jump into those comments, leave your question, and then I will definitely get you some answers. But before we get to your questions, I'm going to start off this conversation with Professor Langston. So, Professor Langston, the first thing I want you to do is just take a few minutes to tell us why it's important that we all take some time to learn and celebrate the culture and contributions of Native Americans throughout the month of November and also beyond this.
Well, that's a great question. Let me first, though, just reemphasize that I'm not Native American, and therefore I do not speak for Native peoples. Although, as you mentioned, I do spend a lot of time learning from them in their communities, listening, and have been enriched greatly by them. I also want to just take a moment to acknowledge that we are all located on the tribal lands of the Wichita and affiliated tribes, as well as other tribes in the area. Now, to your question, I think there are two or three, there are many reasons, but two or three that I'd like to emphasize. One is that Native Americans can teach us a lot. They are the original inhabitants of this continent. They have lived and prospered here for thousands of years. They know how to live in healthy and prosperous ways with all the beings on this continent. And they are modern, contemporary, sophisticated cultures and peoples who can contribute a lot to solving many of the problems that we are confronting today, if we will listen. So I think this month gives us a chance to listen to Native peoples, to learn. And I would add to that, that it's important that we recognize this because in the history of the United States, for the most part, we have erased and silenced Native peoples. The fact is the United States was founded on the genocide of Native American peoples, and we must embrace this and learn this. And this is a good month to begin to come to grips with that. And then finally, I would just add in terms of healthcare, I think that whenever you have respect and understanding of the patient, and in this case, Native peoples, you can give improved healthcare. And certainly with these cultures, as ancient and as knowledgeable as they provide opportunities for collaboration to present improved healthcare. So I'll leave it at that.
And that's very good information. And that also segues me into talking to Dr. Atkins. So Dr. Atkins, as a physician and practicing here in Fort Worth, what is it like providing healthcare for Native Americans? Is it unique in America versus the way we treat others in the healthcare system?
So I will tell you, yes, I'm Native American, I'm Cherokee, and I was pretty much raised as white. Our family is on the Dawes Roll. My grandmother did fight in World War One. I have two uncles that fought in, that were in Iraq. And most of my uncles use the Indian Health Services quite a bit. As a physician, I've only had one patient who was documented Native, and she's a Choctaw from New Mexico. She had zero access in Texas to care. She had to drive to Oklahoma in order to get care for her pregnancy until she finally was able to find a way to qualify for Medicaid, even though she was earning a salary and didn't qualify. Because they didn't have any services here. So I would tell you that lack of access is a big issue. And I spent a little bit of time online. It looks to me like there's only 20 Native American hospital systems in our country, and they are not well spread. And so I would say it's uniquely forgotten.
Wow. And that's really good. Yes,
Could I
Professor
add
Langston.
something to that? I mean, this is really, I think, an excellent example of the results of genocide and colonization of Native peoples that's been implemented by the United States and its predecessors, and the everyday impacts that Native peoples and communities are dealing with.
And this is really, really important because we're going to continue to talk about healthcare. We're also going to continue to talk about COVID-19 and how it has affected Native Americans. I just want to let anyone know, if you're just joining our conversation today on FWMD Live, we are talking about Native American Heritage Month, and we're also talking about understanding healthcare for Native Americans. If you have any questions or you would like to leave comments, you can just jump into the comment section, leave your question, and then I will have our experts, Professor Langston and also Dr. Atkins, just try to give you some helpful advice and share some insight about Native American Heritage Month and also healthcare for Native American people. I do want to put some helpful links in our comments as well, in case you're watching and you just want to read more and try to get connected with the Native American population here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. We have a link to the Urban Intertribal Center of Texas that is located in Dallas, so that can be a good place and a good resource. And also the Urban Indian Health Institute. So we're going to put both of those links in the comment section just so you can have some additional information and resources. And we will continue our conversation. So Dr. Atkins, I want to stay on the topic of healthcare because according to the CDC, Native Americans and Alaska Natives make up 0.7% of the American population, yet they have been disproportionately affected by COVID-19. With what you just said about the lack of access, what else needs to be done to improve healthcare for Native Americans, aside from building more hospitals and centers specifically for them?
You know, I think what I've been thinking about lately is just educating our current medical students and residents, really, and maybe offering some incentive to place residents and physicians for short periods of time in different Native American hotspots, whether it's on the reservation system itself or in a hospital that would serve more Native Americans based on location. The things that I think we're battling, with the high incidence of COVID, part of it is just social construct and families living close together, and especially in reservation systems. I think that we'll see more families, more extended families living in close proximity. There is also a strong distrust of anything government, and a strong distrust of anyone telling them the truth and knowing what to do. And also COVID's a little sneaky, right? It comes in and maybe you get a cough, maybe you don't, maybe you feel sick, maybe you don't. And so it's pretty easy to spread. It's a little bit easier than flu to spread. It is a common cold with more sequelae. So it's a super easy virus to spread out. And so what needs to be done? We need education, access, trust.
Right, and I get what you're saying about education, access, trust, to build that trust.
Sure.
for Native American people here. And also, I do want to talk about the idea of creating a pipeline for Native Americans into healthcare, because you are a physician, Dr. Atkins. And I came across this really interesting report. And this report was done by the Association of American Indian Physicians and the American Association of Medical Colleges, called Reshaping the Journey, American Indians and Alaska Natives in Medicine. And in this particular report, they focused on the importance of not only creating a better healthcare system for Native Americans, but also creating a pipeline for them to be able to work in healthcare as physicians, as nurses, and other forms of being healthcare providers. How important is it that we start to see more Native Americans being represented in Western medicine here in America?
So I would say to the Native American population, fairly important, right? And then like anything else, there are prerequisites and criteria that you have to meet in order to do that. Like you just can't walk into the reservation and say, hey, do you want to be a nurse? Let me bring you over here and train you. So it starts with education. So it starts with education of the kids when they're kindergarten, second grade, third grade, when they get into high school, like trying to, I feel like it's really got to, you want to find people who have an interest and an aptitude, because without those two things, you're not going to go anywhere with it. And I do think that there should be some pretty, it would be nice if their education was free when it came to college and medical or nursing training. And I think that, it gets sticky, like who qualifies for all that, I get it. But if you're going to go in and pull natives out and try to give them a pipeline into medical careers or any needed career, honestly, they probably should be in charge of their own law enforcement too. So if we're going to do that though, you've got to start pretty early and young. It's real easy to say that, right? And then you go on the reservation, look at all those kids in high school, and only 2 of them can actually read at a level that's going to bring them into medical school and have enough of the understanding, or into nursing school. And so I feel like it's got to start a lot younger than it is. It's not a program that we can just put a Band-Aid on. And I feel like that's what the government's done over and over, right? Like 2 colleges will offer land grant money and get a scholarship for free if you're Native American. You can prove you're so much Native American. Well, those are people like me going. Those are people who are of Native blood, but aren't on the reservation, aren't going back to the reservation. We're raised white. And what we really need to do is get access into the Native populations where the natives are living. I spent about 3 months in the Navajo reservation, and there were some Navajo nurses, and there were no Navajo midwives, nurse practitioners, physician assistants, doctors. I was the closest thing, right? And so I think that it's got to start way, way younger, and it really is with education.
That's really, really good information. And Dr. Atkins, since you're talking a lot about education, and you also are talking about your experiences, for you, when you decided you wanted to go into medicine, what was that process like for you? Did you face any challenges or hurdles being Native American?
I'm going to say no, because nobody really, other than what I wrote down on an application, nobody really knows, right? I went to 12 different schools before I graduated from high school. We moved around. I knew from the time I was 3, I was going to be a doctor, and didn't really look back at what would stop me. Didn't pause on how much it would cost. Didn't think about that. Just kind of got on my path. And so the biggest hurdles for me, I would say, were probably being female. And, I've been in medicine since 1990, I have to do my math, 2. And so being female was a little bit challenging, especially during certain rotations as a resident and being in the main business world. But, not as a Native American. I think for the most cases, for me, they just took it as, oh, that's cool.
Right.
I do think, and I would actually venture to say that any Native American that gets into college and is in school is not going to be discriminated against for being Native American. That discrimination starts from the kids on the reservation not having access. It starts with Indian healthcare being so underfunded and defunded every year. It happens from companies taking advantage of the chiefs, or from the chiefs not are taking advantage of their people, right? It's not, it's probably not in the general population. I could walk on your campus and I would not be discriminated against for being Native.
And that I'm glad you brought that point up, is because it's really interesting when you start to have these conversations about race and just how discrimination manifests itself in different forms and different ways depending on your race and ethnicity, especially in America. So I'm glad you actually brought that up, because that's really interesting and good information to share. I just want to let anyone watching know, if you're just joining us, this is FWMD Live, and today we are talking about Native American Heritage Month, and also trying to get a better understanding of healthcare for Native Americans and what issues exist. If you have any questions for our experts, Professor Langston and Dr. Atkins, you can leave your question in the comments, and then I will definitely get you some answers. We are also sharing some resources in the comments as well, just to help people get a little more acclimated with the Native American population that is around here in the Tarrant County area, in the Dallas County area. So we have some that's already there. We're going to add a couple more. We have First Nations Health Authority. That's another good resource. We have the Cherokee Nation Health Services, which is an example of tribal health services. So that's another place you can get information. We also have the National Council of Urban Indian Health. That's another resource that you can get good information about Native Americans and about healthcare, and also the National Indian Health Board. So we are going to link to all of those in the comments. And if you have a question, just jump right in and I will definitely get your question answered. Professor Langston, earlier, Dr. Atkins talked a little bit about trust. And if you read up a lot about Native Americans, and especially when you talk about healthcare and medicine, for Native Americans, historically, there's the role of the elders and healers in Native American religion and medicine practices. Can you just talk to us a little bit about the historical role of that and just help us understand why that is so important to Native Americans?
Sure, it's another good question. Although before I get to that, can I just add some, because Dr. Atkins is giving some really important information and insight. It's very stimulating. And I just wanted to affirm all of her points, but especially about the need for education for Native peoples. And one thing that often flies underneath the radar is that the vast majority of Native peoples today live in urban areas. I think the latest statistic I saw was something like 71% of Native peoples live in urban areas as opposed to rural or reservation communities. So oftentimes their environment can be quite different from the environment in which they exist in reservation or rural communities there. So I think in terms of education, just creating spaces within our educational system where Native students can see themselves in these fields, such as medicine and other STEM-related areas, and that their presence and the accuracy of information that is given is accurate, and that our educational system is not furthering stereotypes. It's vitally important, I think, to start from the ground up in this educational endeavor. Now, to the elders and traditional healers, those are really two different categories. And I'm going to speak generally. One thing that we have to remember is that all Native cultures are different. There's really no such thing as a single Native American culture, but each tribe has its own unique expressions. So I'm generalizing, but it's going to depend from tribe to tribe. But in general, elders, the term elder refers to an older individual. Of course, that's kind of the basic starting point, but it is really a term of respect, and it is a high position of honor, because in a sense, an elder is someone who has been successful in making it through life, and they have knowledge. cultural knowledge as well as practical experience that can be helpful to other people. And so it is a way of sort of respecting them. I know in non-Indian culture, we oftentimes use the word elder or elderly in sort of a derogatory sense. One of my kids texted me last night and asked when I was born. And when I told her when I was born, she typed back that I was elderly, tongue in cheek. But, I mean, that was kind of a nice way of saying I'm getting old. But in Native cultures, being an elder is a position of respect and honor, but does not necessarily have much to do with actual traditional healing. There are different cultures of traditional healers depending on the tribe. And in general, traditional healers are people who have been trained in ancient ways of healing that have been successful. They don't practice these ancient ways if they're not successful. And part of the success of this is the recognition that there are spiritual powers that certain individuals can gain knowledge from and interact with. And these traditional healers will incorporate access to these spiritual powers in combination with other types of knowledge that they use to heal people. And healing is not necessarily just physical. And of course, it's much more complicated than this, but I think we have to be very careful here because there's a danger, especially among non-natives, of dismissing this as superstitious or childish or ignorant, or casting it as a science versus non-science way of approach. And I think when we do that, that at best reflects a gross misunderstanding of these traditions. And at worst, it reflects sort of an arrogant colonialism. And I would just add that there are actually shared values and processes between traditional healing and, say, Western medicine that are points of collaboration. But there are also very different understandings about the nature of the world, the nature of humans, the body, how you interact with the physical and the spiritual world. But all of those create opportunities for collaboration.
And that's a really, really great insight that you just gave about the difference between elders and healers in Native American culture, and also how it's specific to different tribes. We did have a question that came in, and actually I want to direct this question to Dr. Atkins. The question is, what can medical students do to better prepare to take care of diverse patients, especially Native American patients? And I think just understanding or having a general understanding of what Professor Langston just said could help a whole lot, right, Dr. Atkins?
Yeah, it could. There's a lot of there was so much in what he said. My time with the Navajos was pretty profound for me. Honestly, it taught me. I was young, and young doctors have lots of facts. We have lots of facts. We don't have a lot of nuance, and spirituality can be pretty shy, right? So even if you're born in the Bible Belt, you may know everything about Jesus Christ in the Bible, but your spirituality can be pretty shot, especially after 8 years of training. And there was just the manner of seeing the patient for who they are, acknowledging that they are different than you, acknowledging that what they hear and feel from what you say is not necessarily what you're saying or what you think you're saying, and to just kind of to do some checks and double checks with that. In my practice, every human that walks in gets the best VIP treatment I can give her, and I'm a gynecologist, so everybody is a her. Either they've chosen to be a her or they're a her, and to be able to just to acknowledge that we're all different and we're all coming from a different space. It really is meeting somebody where they are. It is exactly that, and to acknowledge that their experience, it's interesting because, we've spent a lot of time in the last 4 months really acknowledging people of color. And I've always considered myself a person of color just because that's how I was raised. Right. And so I identify with a lot of the plight, even though I don't look the part. And even though I haven't experienced the discrimination, I just have an identification with that. And not all people of color have that. Some do, some feel it, some feel the discrimination, and to be able to, and some really don't, and they don't feel like they're a person of color maybe. And so to imply your belief system, your view onto them is probably not the best way, but to meet them exactly where they are and to teach students to do that. And I think, you don't teach people compassion, right? They are compassion, they learn, they feel compassion. But you can certainly, just like point out, hey, what you just did could have isolated or could have put your patient back thinking you don't understand. Maybe if you approached it this way, it would be taken a little differently. Or if you asked a question instead of told an answer, right? So there's a way of asking the question rather than giving them the answer. And really allowing each, every patient interaction, allow the patient to participate in their healthcare. I mean, allow them to participate in the discussion, and not to always paint it black and white. It's generally not. We tend to do that, and we need to really live in the area of the shades. And where are you? And the spiritual beliefs of people and the level to which they think they're doing some natural healing is important to their healing process. Whether or not it gets them to their end goal, that is important to their healing process. And it is, whether it is the concoction that you put on your skin to heal it, or an elixir that you take. When you believe that is going to change, it usually does. And like I said, it may not get you to your end place, but it can be collaborated. That was the best word of the day. It can be collaborated with the rest of the care to achieve the best health outcome.
And that's really great and insightful information. And, it's just so interesting when you talk about having empathy for a patient and having compassion. And when you think about the compassionate practice, which is the communications portion of our curriculum for the medical students, that's exactly what our founding dean, Stuart Flynn, thought was important to have in this new medical school and this new approach to medical education, was that medical students come in compassionate and with empathy, and they want to help everybody. And then the rigors of medical education can kind of lower that as they get toward the end. But the idea of making sure that we're teaching them communication and kind of keeping them mindful of those things every step of the way throughout their 4 years with us is really what can make sure that they keep that compassion and empathy really, really high when they move into a residency and actually begin practicing medicine on their own. I just want to let everyone know, if you're watching right now, this is FWMD Live. Today, we are talking about Native American Heritage Month, and also we are talking about understanding healthcare for Native Americans. If you have any questions, jump in the comments, leave your question, and then Professor Atkins, Dr. Atkins and Professor Langston, will definitely give you some helpful tips and insights, or whatever your question may be. I do want to also share some more resources. If you look in the comments, we have already shared some resources about Native Americans, and we have a few more. We have the White Bison. You can go to whitebison.org to get more information. Also, the National Museum of American Indians. You can go to that link that we're going to put in the comments for general information. Also, it gives you information about specific tribes, nations. You can see their individual websites, for instance, just to get more and more insight about Native American culture, because it is important and it is a huge part of our American culture. I want to go to Professor Langston, because Professor Langston actually has done a lot of work on TCU's campus to raise awareness about Native Americans and Native American culture. So Professor Langston, can you tell us a little bit about the plaque that is actually located on campus that's connected to the Wichita tribe and what it took to get that there on TCU's campus?
Sure, be glad to. And actually, I should say I'm just one of several people who have been working very hard, mostly on a volunteer basis, and to really empower Native peoples on our campus. TCU has a long way to go in doing that, but we're taking steps towards that. The installation of the Native American Monument, which is located between Reed and Jarvis Halls, the two oldest buildings on campus, was something that we did in 2018, but we actually started working on it in 2016. So I was involved with that, but also Dr. Teresa Gall in English and Dr. David Afton-Dillion in anthropology and Albert Nungarai, who at the time was a Puebloan student, and others were involved in this. We contacted the Wichita and affiliated tribes to see if they would be interested in collaborating with us. And they were, because we recognized that while many Native peoples can call this area home, the Wichita and affiliated tribes have been here for hundreds of years. So we worked as equal partners with them in the development and design of the monument itself. And we put it up and we invited them down for a dedication ceremony. They sent a delegation in October of 2018. It was a freezing cold day. I remember that, raining. And we had that ceremony to get that monument erected. Now, I really think the significance of that monument, there's a lot of things that are significant about it, but one of them is that it is an acknowledgement of the processes and results of colonization. I keep going back to that. Colonization is not something from the past. It is ongoing today. The United States is still working to gain Native American lands and resources and to alter Native identities and cultures. And that monument recognizes that the land that TCU is located on is the process of a violent taking of the land from the Native peoples who lived here. And if you know anything about the history of the Dallas-Fort Worth area, General Edward H. Tarrant led an attack against 3 Native villages in 1841 along the boundary between Arlington and Fort Worth. And that event was sort of the final event in a series of events that led to the pushing out of Native peoples. And then within months, white settlers were moving in and creating what we now call Dallas-Fort Worth. They instituted a system that legalized the taking of that land. And through that system, TCU got its land. Now, the monument acknowledges that, but I also think the monument is acknowledging the Wichita and affiliated peoples and all Native peoples who have resided here, and pays respect to their histories. And then the last thing I would say about that is it is an incomplete acknowledgement. And what I mean by that is if it is not followed up with hiring of Native peoples, of addressing their perspectives and concerns, of learning from them, of dispelling stereotypes, of overthrowing colonization, then it just becomes a trinket that adorns the campus. So it's a step, but it's one of many steps that we should take.
All right, thank you for that, Professor Langston. And actually, that was some really, really insightful information you just gave about the history of how the present day Dallas-Fort Worth area came to be what we all now know today. That was very deep. I want to let everyone know this is FWMD Live. If you're just joining us today, we're talking about Native American Heritage Month and also understanding healthcare for Native Americans. If you have any questions, all you need to do is just jump in the comments, leave your question, and I will get you some answers. We did have a question that came in for you, Dr. Atkins. And I want to just say first, thank you for submitting your question. And the question is, what was different practicing medicine on the reservation versus practicing medicine in a big urban city?
So as a resident, I worked in a county hospital, and the county hospital is, pretty much government funded, and we see a lot of patients who are somehow funded through government funding, but no real private insurances and things like that. As part of our residency, we also work in the VA hospital, which takes that down one more notch. And you take it to the Indian reservation, you can just down it another 3 notches. So basically, access to anything modern didn't exist. And so I was in Gallup on the Navajo reservation in 1998. And in 1998, we were still using triplicate forms to fill out birth certificates. So it relied on handwriting, and the 3 triplicates, you peeled them apart, one for the government, one for the Indian reservation, one for the people, whatever it was. The equipment that we had was fairly poor. What wasn't different were the people. The people were amazing people who wanted good outcomes. The Navajo very much wanted things as natural and hands-off as possible. And so this is what we worked for them. Sometimes you can't do that when you have 2 lives at stake, but we did our very, very best to honor their wishes and allow them to participate in their care. But it's government funded, and it's terribly funded. And so we felt that as physicians. And I don't know if anybody's out there watching that's done anything for a government healthcare system. It's pretty hard. It's pretty hard to stay inside those guidelines, to follow what they ask you to do, to prescribe the right medication that they will pay for, and to do it all so that your hospital actually gets reimbursed for their care so that they can stay open.
Right. Wow. We had another question that came in from Jessica Martinez. Jessica, thank you for your question. And she said this question is actually for Professor Langston and also Dr. Atkins. The question is, do you think there is a pathway to blending traditional and modern medical practices? Dr. Atkins, I'll let you take the first crack at answering that question.
Yes, I would say yes, there is. I would actually say that across the board. We could say the same thing about Eastern medicine. You could say the same thing about any tribal African medicine and the Native American culture. And it just really requires an understanding of what it is. And I think that one thing that happens as you get elderly, and Professor Langston can attribute this too, is as you get elderly, you actually start to acknowledge that there are a lot of things at play, and there are a lot of things that you can do and allow and work with that can create a positive outcome. So for example, 20 years ago, I might not have agreed that the spiritual medicine was just as important as the Western medicine that I'm used to delivering. But I will tell you today, it's absolutely that important with all of my populations. And I have plenty of them. I have women straight from different areas in Africa, and they're very tribally related, and some Native American patients and some Mexican patients too. And each has a different view on what is important for them, and a different view on what spiritually needs to be done and how they should be healed. And I can't just come in with a steamroller and take over. I really need to hear where they are, understand. And there's a reluctance to tell me because they think I'm not going to believe them, because I may not be trustworthy. So it takes me a bit of time to gain the trust, and then to be able to incorporate what they see as very important in their healthcare plan.
And Professor Langston, if from your perspective as a teacher, do you think that blending traditional and modern medical practice is something that can happen and can be effective?
Absolutely. Native peoples, for the thousands of years that they have lived on this continent, have always done that. They've always embraced technology. They've always embraced the latest ideas in terms of survival and prospering. They're sophisticated, as I said earlier on. So there is not an immediate disregard of other ways of thinking. They're highly adaptive. I cannot certainly speak for all Native peoples, but those who have taught me, they do not think in terms of it's either Western medicine or traditional medicine, but it's both and. And where they do best, at least from what they tell me, is in context where there's a recognition and a respect for both ways. And I think where the blending has to start from is an equal and mutual respect from both traditions. It can't be an attitude of, well, we're going to allow you to have a say, we're going to tolerate you. I think it has to be a respect that both traditions have insights and positive, helpful ways of being healthy. And I think that's the starting point for collaboration.
And on FWMD Live, we've had a lot of very serious conversations about racism, about mental health, about Jewish people in America. And we always want to talk about how we can be an ally. We always want to give people information of how you can be an ally for people, right? And not just always be on the outside side looking in and kind of help them in their fight for equality and in their struggles. So Dr. Atkins, for young physicians going into healthcare, how can you be an ally for Native Americans who might have aspirations to work in healthcare, or just Native Americans who need good care when they come to you?
So it's so interesting. I don't know how you can't be an ally. That's where I am right now with that. It's, that Native Americans, especially, like, I mean, for the most part, you're not gonna know who's a Native American unless you're walking into a reservation. And if there is any person who is of whatever age is interested in healthcare, then you start talking about what options there are, honestly, and what do they need to do, what steps. If you're talking to someone who's 12, then you say, okay, what you need to do is you actually need to do really well in your math and science. You might want to study some music. If you can learn another language, that would be super amazing. And keep going, and then start looking around for places where you can get scholarships for your education. I didn't pay for my education. I didn't pay for it because I was Indian. I didn't pay for it because I got a scholarship, an endowment scholarship, when I went to Baylor, and it covered my entire medical school and college. And so it's there. And especially if you are Native or a person of color, you just have to look. And usually there's more money in the private school systems. I will just say that they've got more available. And so if you can, kind of just encourage them that way. And I do, I mean, and you should too. Like, every single person that you meet that has an interest and an aptitude to move forward, you should. And if you don't know if they have the aptitude, let's just find out. Let's start teaching them some things. It's not uncommon for you to see a 15-year-old in my office learning what I do. And she's there to figure it out. Can I do this? And, maybe medicine, maybe being a doctor is not really what she wants to do, but there are plenty of healthcare fields and lots of options, and not everything has to be your 12-year commitment.
Right. That's a great point you made about just respecting people, because you may not always know. Like, even for myself coming into this conversation, what I do know from the history of even my own lineage is that my grandmother's great-grandmother was actually Native American, and we have a picture of her. My aunt actually found it because she had been doing resource, looking back into our family tree. So even for myself, like being an African American, Native American, like, how can I not be an ally when that's actually also a part of my identity, even though I'm not fully aware of it, or I'm not completely connected to it as well as I should be. But it just shows you how we are all interconnected and together, which brings up
Prescott.
Uh-huh.
Prescott, I would tell you that many, many, many African American people are also Native American. If you'll remember, if right around the Civil War, we were all in prison together. We were all made to fight together, and so you know, we really are way connected, all of us. And there's not probably not very many modern day Native Americans who are not also European in some way. We may not want to claim that because we feel like we didn't have a choice in it, but we are all very, very connected, and there's not much difference. And I think the minute we start seeing that we're really more the same than we are different, it'll be a lot easier to empower others.
All right. And Professor Langston, I do want to give you the opportunity to add something to that about being an ally from your perspective.
Sure. I think, you know, I just want to emphasize the respect idea. That's the basic starting point, to respect Native peoples as equals. And in a sense, to respect them as our elders. They are the elder cultures on this continent, and we have much to learn from them. I think humility is essential. The idea that we don't know everything, and the idea is that we can learn from Native peoples, is essential to being an ally. And along with that is listening. I know, like, I'm in the academic field, so I get paid for talking. And maybe if more of us got paid for listening, we would do more of it. But I think it's essential for us to sit and hear these diverse cultures. Native peoples are exceedingly diverse, and to learn from that diversity through listening. And then I would just end it with, we must embrace our nation's history with Native Americans and take responsibility for the genocide and the colonization that is ongoing, that the United States has enacted against Native peoples. We have to deal with that. And if we don't deal with it, we will never uproot systemic racism in this country. This is the original systemic racism, is colonization. And it's not a thing of the past, it is ongoing. And we all have to take a hard look at the policies and procedures of our institutions to see if they are reflecting colonial attitudes and practices and languages.
All right. Thank you for that, Professor Langston. And that will do it for today's FWMD Live chat. I want to thank everyone on Facebook for being a part of this conversation today. And I also want to give a very, very special thanks to our guests, Dr. Atkins and Professor Langston.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
It was a pleasure.
Yes.
All right. Before we go, I just want to make sure to let everyone know to join us on Wednesday coming up, November 11th at noon on Veterans Day, because we are going to have a live chat about improving healthcare for our veterans. We will also have School of Medicine Department Chair and Department Chair of Family Medicine, Dr. Grant Fowler, with us. And also a first-year medical student, Kyle Simon, will be joining us, who is actually a 7-year military veteran. So we're going to have a really good conversation about healthcare for veterans, and we are also going to honor our veterans next Wednesday, November 11th at noon. Make sure you join us. And also, you can check out the Facebook event that's on our page to make sure you get a reminder to join us at noon on Wednesday. So that, once again, that will do it for today's FWMD Live. And I want to thank everybody for watching, and we will see you next week.
Hey, my name is Lauren Moore and I'm an MS1. If you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe and follow us on social media at the links below. And if you want more information about our school, be sure to check out our website.